So, fast forward about 14 to 30 days, and your seedlings have emerged. This is a different container and a different species, but these seedlings are called Baptisia. They're a native plant, and I seeded them on December 8th. They were outside for a while, and they had to come in. That's why it's more than 30 days. But a lot of these have germinated, and they're ready to go into a larger container. There's several types of containers that you can use. Cell trays, so you have the deep ones like this, and you have the shallow cell trays, which are more commonly used. You can see the difference. These are both 50s, meaning they contain 50 cells. Just one deep and one is shallow. These 50s are used usually when you direct seed plants. So something like squash goes really well in a 50 because it's a big seed with a high germination rate. So you're pretty sure that you're going to get everything that you seed. And plants like squash you don't normally prick. But the nice thing about these is they use less soil than a deep cell. So if you do have several seeds that don't germinate, you're not wasting as much soil as you would if you tried to direct seed into a tray like this. We like to use these deeper cell trays for pricking because oftentimes when the seedling is growing in its mass seeding flat, the roots will be very deep and it might be deeper than a shallow cell. So this gives us a lot of root zone to plant those seedlings into. So you can also prick into cell trays this big, but you're going to want to take the seedlings out when they're smaller, so you don't have to dig all the way to the bottom of the cell tray. But for today, we're going to demonstrate on a deep cell tray. These the shallow cell trays work better for smaller seeded plants like this one, for example. They're very tiny, and you can easily plant into a shallow tray without worrying about bottoming out. So you kind of choose your trays based on the seedling size. But in general, for vegetables, you're probably going to be pricking out smaller seeded vegetables like onions and peppers and leeks, then as opposed to larger seeded vegetables you probably directly plant into the cell trays. So to start off we're going to mix our soil and fill these trays. This tray. So I have my moistened soil that I made earlier. What we're going to do is fill this tray. So I'm using my scoop. You could use a bucket or a can. I'm just pouring it into the top of the flat. I'm not pushing anything down. And for this you don't have to sift out the larger particles like you did for the seeding part, because a plant of this size, once it's a seedling, will be able to the roots will be able to infiltrate and go around larger particles because each plant has its own home or room. These are all roommates here. Sometimes you'll find pieces of wood or twigs. It's better if you find them to discard them and not put them into the cell tray because they might interfere with the root growth. Okay, so I've filled this to the top and I'm skimming it. The next thing I'm going to do is going to compact the soil just to the degree that it reduces the air space. Because if you were to look at the soil in this state that I just poured it in, there's going to be large gaps of empty space that just naturally happens because of the nature of the soil and the particle size. So you're going to see how to reduce that, but not to over compact it, because it's possible to over compress this soil to the point where roots cannot penetrate into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this flat up to just below chest height, so maybe a foot or so, and drop it twice. So 1 and 2. And you can see how far down that soil all went. And if I was to take my finger and push into it, I can feel, you can see it still goes down. I didn't have to press very hard to do that. And now that soil is compressed below it, but not to the point where it can harm the plant. So I'm just going to re-aerate that so it's not compressed. But this is the approximate density that you want your soil, your cell soil to be. So you can do that in a large cell tray, deep cell tray, or the shallow one. It's good to do a couple drops. And after this, what I'm going to do is just fill the rest of that space with loose soil so that it's easy to plant in. And even this soil, when you water it a few times, is going to reduce, and the level is going to drop, as you'll see when we go water our other cells. So this is a good, a well compressed soil, a cell tray ready to receive its seedlings. So what I like to do also is put, for these heavier deep cell trays, I like to put a supporting tray so that it doesn't flex and warp when I'm moving it and handling it. So this just keeps it rigid and flat, and like a nice tray of lasagna. Okay, so now I have my prepared cell tray and my seedlings that are ready to go in. The next thing I need is this expensive tool here, a little plastic butter knife. Very useful, very good. So what I'm gonna do, and this is important, especially if you've really seeded this densely, is I'm going to work around the edges of this. If you're using any other container, you want to go around the edge of the container lightly. So I'm going to push these seedlings aside gently, and very gently, trying not to damage the roots. Kind of pry it up like an omelet. So I'm working around the edge, and ideally it's good to take this out all in a block. These seedlings weren't sown dense enough to actually form a nice block, because when you sow them very thickly, the roots will kind of form a mat all together, and it's easy to pull them out as one as a block. But in this case, it's a little bit looser. So I'm just gonna, once I get the edges up enough for my fingers to get in there, I'm just gonna pick it up and put it into a tray, into a cafeteria tray like this. Trays are good because they kind of capture everything, and it's easy to manipulate and move the seeds from this point. So I got most of the seeds out. There's maybe one or two left. Now, if your seeds are growing in a dense group like this, the way to separate them is like peeling a banana. You don't want to pull them straight out, because that can damage the roots. A sprout like this has a single taproot and without too many branches, so it's actually very easy to separate. But if you have a denser, a more fibrous root system, they can intertangle with each other, and pulling them straight out will damage and harm the seedling. So pretending that these are a dense root mass, the way you separate them is you grab one, and like a banana, you peel it down and sideways, like that. So I've got a few of them here. What I'm going to do is I'll lay them out. You want to avoid handling the root part. You want to touch the plant from the stem up to the leaves, because that's safe to handle. The roots are delicate, so be very gentle handling them. And the other thing that you want to avoid is shaking off any soil that's on the roots. You can try to leave as much soil on the root as possible. So these are coming apart pretty easily, but see, it's good to leave some soil on. So I'm just going to start with one row at a time, and I like to lay them out at most 2 rows, because it's easier to consolidate your steps. So you lay them out, you plant them, and then you lay out a couple more and plant them. You don't want to lay out the entire flat, because now that these seeds are out of the soil, they're susceptible to drying out from the sun, and so I only lay out a few before I plant them. So for planting, grab your seedling and your shovel. You stick the shovel in. It should go in nice and smooth, and put it in and wiggle it. So another reason why you pre-moisten the soil is because when you go into it and make a hole, you see that this moist soil, it's stuck together, and it left a nice hole for me to plant in. If it was too dry, as soon as I took out the knife, it would crumble back in on itself. So that's another reason why you want good moistened soil for your seedling. So place it in, and then just very gently with your fingers push in. You're not pressing down too hard. You're just making sure that the seedling stays stable. And you want the leaves, these leaves, to be not too far above the soil. You want them to be maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch above the soil. If the seedling's sitting up too high, like this, I'll demonstrate an improper seeding. So if it's too high, actually that's not even too bad, but if it's too high, the plant can fall over. If it's too low and the leaves come too close to the soil, it can become susceptible to leaf diseases and rotting. So you want it to be, well above the soil, kind of how the plants naturally emerge. So if you find the roots get kind of stuck on the sides of the hole, you can use the knife to gently guide it in deeper, and then plant it. See, this is a little bit on the high side, but this plant will recover. If the plant has a really thin stem, then it's more critical to plant it nice and very deep. But this is okay. See, I have to guide it in. If this the root tip is pointing up, it's okay if that happens from occasionally. The plant will eventually wrap itself around, but you ideally want the tip to be facing down, straight down. So there you go. And you basically repeat this process throughout the whole cell tray, and eventually you'll have a tray full of plants. It's okay if they haven't all come up yet either. If they're just starting to come up, you can plant them and they will complete their process. And you're also somewhat adjusting the depth that you dig the hole based on the size of the seedling. So a smaller seedling, you're obviously not going to go all the way down as you would with a deeper seedling. Also, you want to make sure you're kind of comfortable when you're doing this. So this, if you're doing this for a long time, you probably want to sit down and make sure that you're at a good height to work on the seedlings. So now we have a full tray of seedlings, and it's time now at this point to give them a little bit of water. Even though the soil is moist, and if I did leave them for a day, they would probably still all survive. But the next step of watering is important because it will make the soil form good contact with the roots that you just put in, and that is extremely helpful when in helping them to start putting out new roots. So watering is an important step to do. When I water, I keep the stream moving around. And I always pay attention to the edges first, because the edges dry out the fastest, and usually the edges and corners are the most neglected parts of the cell tray. So I start with the edges. And the edges, that's pretty good. Letting the water just puddle up, and then I keep it moving. I'm not letting the water overflow in any case. That's pretty good. And you can see now the water went straight in, meaning that it's obviously well moistened. And you can see that the soil level in most of these cells is below the rim. And that is very important, because when you go ahead and water these cells going forward, you want the water to catch in each cell. You don't want it you don't want the soil level to be right at the rim level, because when the water puddles in there, it'll overflow, and if this cell dries out a lot, the water won't infiltrate down deep enough to the root zone. So that's why, another reason why you want the cells to be the soil level to be below the brim. And now I'm feeling this. It feels good and heavy. Maybe this weighs about maybe 8 or 9 pounds total. So that means that this is well moistened, and these plants are going to be okay for a couple days without being watered. Although we will obviously water them about once a day.